In 1980, partly funded the company air in which the private industries also the research missions and all the important things. SAI also successfully be important milestone that Israel can put the business model to private firms that long-term firms want to buy for water return to fuel sustainable lunar race settlement and Middle Eastern space race proposals missile arms racing because of dual use technology that's for the body. And 21 the Middle East is entering its space research in the Cold War that dates up to the entry of already put the orbit of the United States 26 and state grants and advanced technology for consider for weapons, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and dress military space technology, key to dominate future battles, based on dual use technologies of the whole world, technologies, data for communication, work, espionage, advances, permanent, understanding the best states of national technology, counter missiles, joint the states of technology, dual opportunity, dual system, monitoring, destroying missiles, and intelligence, states, and truth, and interest, and anti-Semitic missile missiles, the importance of joint stock, large Iran, sending missile reveals, no secret intent, making a whole new leaf, which is attacks, conventional attacks, US, working with Israel, both defense and missile arms race, SLS, dressing for powers, to salvation, coming with your arm race. In the China's most evident defense strategies, specifically the US partners, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE for great offensive missile capabilities, ballistic missiles, good off missiles, with advantage of around delivering missiles to fail. There no need to fire offensive missile race, but military competition, direct watching Moscow war with missiles and destabilizing just about the gas, but the 5 times we try losing accuracy, lethality, for feature the certain US is dropping GCPO, the half a dozen regional powers, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, protection, nuclear energy as a solution to possible defense, nuclear power generations, versus nuclear missiles defense systems, now gone because I'm going to feed Emirates and Iran having Qatar influence nuclear power that's large. 19 office of the least president and threatening the entire world, America, Europe, Georgia, China, all deeply involved in the worker, escalated war between nuclear powers, and for nuclear war constitution, actual servants, and one civil rights, and that common sentence to measure models, models, 100,000 weapons on the left, temperature would drop whole degree, that's the ISIS will inhibit for this instance, God, prevalence, disruption, factors, some of the Jamaican from some extinction of the nations, some we be the genesis, and then likely the ancient was limited. At page 3, is relation collaboration, placement of private space, is key to sustain Israel UAE relations, and when you're 21, that two countries and everyone working together, so I also held no meetings with American officials to cooperation, and here, encourage further cooperation. So it comes to further advanced technologies, government signing agreements, collaboration, making harnessing of space for bringing her together, and space is the bedrock concept. Has this constant 21 that Israel UAE partnership is just be priority of cooperation. One way the two nations would have a complete space framework cooperation, jointly participating in relations between the UN, strong Israel UAE relations, escalate war in Libya, Yemen, and Syria. This pact money, the sides between Israel and UAE will have part of the Cold War the region to be Israel, Egypt, UAE, rival Turkey, Turkey, US, UAE, Israel, regional wars, that's what comes in Yemen and Syria. No, U.S. have spearheaded negotiations with oil blockade engaged in diplomacy agreements with UAE, Israel, and other questions as well as roles result by household unlike the person's role in Libya, Syria, Yemen, which Israel may get any person UAE aggressive role in UAE will look and support the military intervention by Egypt and skip down Middle East war is established in 21. If you're on 151 has a capacity to include this one fall easy for mistake housing disaster rates well technical risk and any sexual emissions around places that it'll have full price in Middle East and conventional studies and over judgment interests in the entire region of like assessment percent and no missile we're going to run in a will fight but they represent the framework that issues that should be the pressure pain and all conception issue follow this was a real loving Gulf versus robust and transfers thus the center is consistent with the active alternatives Blum and all in the pleasure finds word similar ordering pleasure basically connected to the war the person who will average point is between option or rewarding that many ranges of pleasure or the opposite regions in the limbic system. The research on neurosystem consciousness approach, error consciousness approach, area of mortal humans, humans, ability to rewards that are years away. All right. Ready? Do you say yeah? The first advantage about contamination, is there any other private entity other than Space IL that could potentially cause this impact? I'm not sure. Space IL was the one that sent Bereshit. Space IL is the one. Is there any other private entity that has the capability? Well, yes, there are other private entities that. What private entity? I don't know the names of other private entities. Okay. Space IL is the one that is closest to releasing the next. All right, sure, that's fine. The Shea evidence, can you name? This is also talking about Bereshit. Does this evidence mention any other private entities that have engaged in the appropriation of outer space that you find problematic? The Solomon evidence? The Shea evidence on the racing advantage. Sure. The Shea evidence. The Shea evidence is talking. The Shea evidence indicates. Okay, this was a new AF. I really need some clarity on like what your cards say. Please point to me and align your evidence where it does not talk about space. I'm not like obviously other companies like have. Okay, name a company. Name a company. I don't know the other names of other companies that you read a new AF and you only know one company that's part of your. Part of it. Like this is ridiculous. Funded by Space IL, which is the most likely company to send the next space. Okay, got it. Space IL. Or harder about because it cites this as an example of how the Israeli commercial sector can scale up over time. Sure, not interested. The Oviati evidence about sustained Israel-UAE relations and the Pons evidence. The Pons evidence seems to be about
a lunar project that's between the public sector of Israel and the UAE? How does he have solved that?
Sure. So our argument is that further UAE Israeli space expansion requires further Israeli space expansion sort of requires appropriation of outer space to be requires like commercial endeavors in outer space to be successful.
What piece of evidence says that the commercial sector is key to future innovation by the public sector?
Sure. So the Durkee evidence indicates that the Israeli space industry is driven by a belief of future profits caused by a belief in future profits caused by appropriation. So that's things like mining, space coal, etc. Which means
why does that mean that the public sector is reliant upon the private sector?
Sure. So the Edwards 17 evidence, or sorry, the PAC 22 or 20 evidence, the Pons 21 evidence. First of all, I don't think it's like necessarily about like the public sector. Like the next line cites Space IL as an example of like what the cooperation would look like. Which means that the relations would likely be between the private sectors. Also, this entire card is about the private sector. I don't know what you're talking about public sector.
Missiles raising, what great powers are wait, so that's about missile. Okay, that's fine. The Lantier evidence, why would great powers be drawn into a Middle East war? Is it just economic interests?
The Lantier evidence, they have strategic interests, oil supply, economic interests, like ties to like different regimes in the Middle East.
Cool. I'll take prep.
Okay.
Okay, 2:15 left. Let me put that in chat. Let me send the talk first. Okay, doc time. Well, actually, I'll just run a bit more time. Were there any theory arguments made in the 1AC?
Sorry, what arguments?
Theory arguments.
No.
Okay, 7 more seconds. All right. Orders 5 in case. Is everyone good to go?
Almost. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. This of the Counterplan to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space to collaborate with private entities in the state of Israel to establish and implement long-term sustainability guidelines and to fully endorse the programs in space by those entities that confirm with agreed upon standards. Only international multilateral efforts can effectively incorporate the private sector and search sustainability markets. Don't know when to like to take the represent state forward the work with the Department of World Assist you group to send your guidelines for long-term sustainability co-based objects for ways incorporating and prevent the private sector guidelines revised and new topics to be proposed guidelines should become a living document history and to be helped identify future standards and importance of guidelines that they codified nationally set best targets for sustainability space and essentially global talent that can only be addressed effectively all countries tackling the space and hurling multilateral most effectively addressing multilateral points co-based where the international community has the opportunity to work together and share space in very productive future generation. Clear multilateral guidelines prevent an imminent bubble burst into Brussels space. MC unilateral policies make BCs get cold wheat Martinez and 20 parts of the government legally has made it operational to member as the dark trade in the east domestic multiple states very lack of periods are literally domestic that puts in risk on prison or sea line predictive the Hampstead developed standards good data European co-based international guidelines about any reason to start attracted by 7 million and 8% given venture capital there's stranger that we are seeing investment dollars what happens if that having a cold wheat withdrawals president the impact of bottom line community the different people population loss why it's important to have relation-based correlation the coalition of companies that promotes industry bodies supporting care data for the way to guys and co-based progress at the margins spin off tech exchange global information hours Hampton and be innovation hard predicting you testing become aware take up for the application rate the company organizers reach tech innovation the mapped out helps and tonight's progress of creative developers the community has increased innovation tech development artists and ability to terrestrial life artists more critical real estate innovation will come from the commercial sector market carded sector solves extinction Matthew 18 more people have said that more world weight preventing extinction while part of caring about the free have to cover about a president and train rate what's going to also try to feel like as best it can and the wall hope like a good development plan shows collection of massive resources meaning to low probability of annihilation acting press needs icon debate or AI from the practical warming side makes sense to processing for the future harness universe improvement centers and norms. Next off, Counterplan private entities in the state of Israel should appropriate outer space out of developing an artificial Van Allen electromagnetic shield and delegate administrative control to international authority responsible for determining responsible operation. All of the forms of appropriation of outer space by private entities in the state of Israel is unjust. The Counterplan creates an artificial Van Allen electromagnetic shield that's always changed from warm and coronal mass ejection balance and taking out with your direct earth from the solar radiation. CMG is not true. There's had weekend deployed L1 that created artificial Van electromagnetic shield like earth and gets a major CMG can modulate for solar radiation and reduce climate change. This microstructure would be safe. The humans use it would be a part of the cause of LT as an operation would certainly have to be under national 30 kg guarantee responsible operation control. PLC is entirely possible. So would have to super large spec earth magnet field and require parts to the easy regenerate solar radiation and PL could protect against massive solar temperature solar radiation and protect against severe climate change later solar radiation toxic growth and save the human race. Increasing system vulnerability, weakening alien balance means solar storms will crush civilization, sparse resource shortages, economic collapse, grid failure, pandemics, all of which combined cause extinction. Pelton, 16 humans have become completely monotonous and the directed from the one team you would have to create a terminates a very real danger, economic risk, will satellite the internet massive CEO, marine rights, the world economic government preference, able to Montreal, how we never indicate these are real and there's literally no predictive programs that way there's likely to be a spike in world in coming years after to occur by bail out of release and risk being greatly missed satellites confirm their magnetic positive interfering during the shift building will go ahead with me normal security from very crazy vulnerable all the global scale lost by around the world could be the failure system that put a risk of separation in water for this. Next off, appropriation of the moon by private entities in the state of Israel through lunar real estate license agreements is just all the forms of appropriation of outer space by private entities in the state of Israel just it uses an array of regulation incentives to prevent debris and democracy access based law including property rights for vast benefit financial rewards incentives for stewardship property discovery the system is already individuals can be for possible and consider like consider vital service enabled individuals can be for positive and so the conversation getting ahead start sells leaders in commercial space dominance pulling 22 American 100 intermediate effects the private sector from like open door resources earth minerals gold or healing Artemis creating secret mutual understanding recognition then national appropriation to certainty recriminates to exception Russian China recognize benefit has left behind the US space likely to be Russian China president sector like Audi to cap and cross-apply the innovation arguments that we from the other page. Next off, Counterplan. The private entity in the state of Israel, formerly named as Space IL, ought to immediately halt the appropriation of outer space. The Bereshit 1, the Bereshit 2, and all future missions that attempt to appropriate the moon ought to be immediately halted. Private entities in the state of Israel ought to immediately halt all cooperation and engagement with the United Arab Emirates on all of its private in all of its private entities. Next off, Bolsonaro is losing now, but it's close and will be decided by the economy. Economist 22, local community, but the economy also promised performance to low that employment standard before the pandemic. The company good worth between election investors giving little the benefit of the doubt. Ruth good as a pragmatism, Benny, and expected to recall the political without humans and more more party associated with corruption in the public. 9. The plan creates a restriction that causes companies to move to states with lower standards. Albert Dorothy Little runs specifically with countries that work community for economic reasons does avoid compliance with certain restrictions and to commercial state for the foreign shop when choosing which country long-term companies may register companies more favorable conditions to seek out the West community for launch to lead safety products increase the potential for capital launch and why launch rate could be reliable commercial company drive launch form shop outside the United States. Brazilian commercial space appeals to private entities, but a stunted analysis causes economic revitalization. It's one of the serve interest commercial development private sector engagement entrepreneurial activity private segment actively permanent closely industrial cluster constitutes favorable to one of companies that map both space and non-space sectors for forming partners with space agency worldwide. Brazil's human capital technical capability and scientific knowledge and cards have been seen at the campus of embrace as a result of lack of coordination under investment. Re-election kills the Amazon critical global biodiversity road. 2022 had the point of return balls environmental protection weekend during Sunday could be a relative funds of the plan 164 was cleared in county less appealing to the costs. Company throughout some returning with some destroys big forward time x 20%. Amazon plays control climate regulations long as earth supports the Amazon risk value great race its habitat the forest more. That's 3 million species. Extinction tipping points overwhelm resilience wilms. Attempting to prop in a relative concept which reports jeopardization and domino effect will cause extinction of many species and 3 property pollution. Human extinction being inevitable only with holds to stop every cause while it is still popular. New undisclosed ask regarding issue negative ground they make negative ground catastrophe good will be permanent results extreme engineers heavily skewed down and interfere with after debater their strategy was permanently skewed case. We'll do Middle East war stuff. Iran nuclear meet 14 the Middle East terrorism ominous resemblance to the Balkans could start happening again. The breaks down neither China nor any China competing the United States when the late China isn't taking silence initiatives for all of the wants to spread the global US alliances and the royal pure China Russia. Let's surprise indicate multi balance and close we don't have anything able to finally balance system of the time world today's crisis and more easy controlled by powers. No hostile strikes Israel would never catch 15 so likely to Israel strike if the guys read up so a long time ago Israel bombs Saddam struck Syria would have to repeat that odds the same match last minute strike would increase likely to run but build the ones Israel's attack would give regime military reason for Darfur to take out inspectors saying will crumble giving Iran research run could regain popularity to get her ties with the US war republic that posts another conflict growing corporate Israel would operate overnight showing how he operates with has strong checks on force any operation that goes approval cabinet for clear and gain support of a security establishment and IDF nuclear war would not cause extinction. Walker 18 research flawed and out of state after presenting to the Walter Hill nuclear and correct based on filtered security of fire surveyed from agricultural age long trickle and short-term effects modules were based on flawed assumptions reproduction of large areas burnt and wildfire of creating old fire shaded a small part of the Gulf area suit something about up in the day through rain sensitive paper starting payload super suit out but this point of contention whether super and tired of it can't get anywhere. Disease won't cause extinction. Humans are experienced in disease transitory even if they're right that alien diseases might be more mutative. The fact that people are so dispersed is still a warrant that takes us out for a court. Attempting natural damage by like cause extinction of extinction. Less than 4% when infectious disease and globally dispersed of the facts can be received using numerous dispersion. Capable of natural response very likely to be killed by pandemic highly so bad kills hope ability spreads like depression not be highly lethal. Containment solves it's more effective than vaccination walls. Attempting helping record because for seasonal vaccine many threats should be made serious hostage take bonds. There's no incentive for any company making a vaccine to run self voice into the active and hanging. There was still a vaccine cheaply fault to health workers on the ground thanks to the efforts of thousands of health workers from PCD Nigerian officials were quickly diverted to fight Ebola. Without aid Nigeria would not have been able to stern Ebola. Civil defense amendments prevent nuclear war from causing extinction under any reasonable estimate standards and 17 providing protection would suffice building a simple for transfer with converting with video over 5 was sent to sovereign utility could save nearly 7 the Dominican Republic civil defense and provide cycles of supply salting water and prices in time to go to shelter most part of civil defense to European countries with extensive civil defense programs.
Can I get a mark doctor and cross-ex?
Yeah.
Okay.
One sec. Let me send it. Okay, the document is set.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Let's start status of all the counterplans.
Conditional.
Dispo?
Conditional.
Oh, okay. The last advantage counterplan, what's the net benefit?
The Brazil decide because we read an argument about perception.
An argument about perception, explain.
So just the perception that private entities are going to move to the Brazilian space economy, because you've said in Crossexamination that long-term your impacts might still happen. The perception that people will begin to put upfront investment, initial investment.
Why would those companies be formed and then move to Brazil before?
Yeah, we've read fantastic link evidence about this. So Albert evidence.
When is the election?
Our evidence says 2022.
Like
oh wait,
when?
no. Our
when
evidence.
2022?
No, our uniqueness evidence is from 2022. But
when is the election? Like when in 2022?
Oh, I think it's either October or November. I can search it up for you.
Okay, October or November. Which private companies are formed, move to Brazil?
October 2nd, 2022.
October 2nd. Okay, perfect. The Nakodo 21 evidence indicates that So which evidence says that perception about the economy increasing will like
the Nakado evidence says, quote, actively promoting commercial space. So our argument is that Brazil is the perfect safe haven for everywhere to go. So even if companies don't form, that's irrelevant to our argument, and that will also permanently take out the case. But second, just VCs, before like any companies have to start, VCs would start putting money there, start investing in the Brazilian economy, because they would see Brazil as the next logical place for state or for space to begin. So like index funds could begin there. VCs would start to
wait, your link is not about Brazil though, but like Albert.
Yes, it is. Our Nocado evidence is specifically talking about why Brazil is the perfect safe haven.
Sure, that's fine. The re-election kills the Amazon. This evidence indicates that. Wait, which evidence indicates that like Bolsonaro's competitor would be better for the Amazon?
Bolsonaro is like much worse than any other competitor. He's part of the conservative party. He's part of the conservative party in Brazil. I'm not sure what the actual competitor name, but he's part of the conservative equivalent conservative party in Brazil. He has refused to give native Indian indigenous people within the Amazon rainforest any rights. So he uses all those for massive amounts of industrial and mega farms. He refuses to acknowledge Amazon biodiversity because he keeps saying that like regeneration will happen, which it clearly has not in the past 30 years.
Okay. That's fine. I'll start prep.
Cool. Also, I forgot to say this, but another net benefit to the counterplan is the first off.
Yeah, really quick. I'm just gonna make sure I get the doc, and then I'll start prep. Okay. It's like scanning for viruses. Sorry. Okay. Okay, starting prep. Did you read all this stuff on case?
No.
Okay.
When you asked for mark, like I just thought you meant cards. But I marked.
Oh, which cards did you not read on case?
Okay.
Can you just like mark the cards you didn't read on case and send it like during my prep time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's done.
Okay, I used 440. I'll send it. Order is the case, the offs in order.
If there's a doc, I haven't gotten it yet.
Case and offs in order.
Yeah. It is send.
Okay, I'm good.
So mine.
Okay. Perfect. Kick the disease advantage. I'm not going for. I'm not going for. I'll concede diseases don't cause extinction. The Middle East word and the second advantage conceded. The second advantage conceded that conceded that space appropriation causes increased arms. It causes increased arms rating in Israel. In Israel and in Israel and the Middle East because it's such a new sort of model for acceleration. It's a new sort of model of acceleration and which spills over into dual use technology. That sort of arms racing causes Israeli first shifts because the countries start to fear each other, which draws in great powers that have alliance commitments and have alliance commitments in the area. You say it won't go. You say it won't go nuclear. No. Yes, it will. This is specifically their evidence is specifically about a sort of minor oil dispute and a minor crisis, but not about larger arms races that threaten first strikes in the area, which means that their meat evidence doesn't take into account international strikes. The KEC evidence doesn't assume large scale arms buildups in other countries where Israel would feel threatened and be incentivized to first strike. Yes, extinction of the blast would result in nuclear winter, famine, and radiation. That way, the process of extinction is far worse and causes a ton of suffering for people alive. For people alive right now. Also, their evidence that it indicts is not about our study. It's about the Tune and Robach study, which our evidence is not. It's about the Tune and Robach study, which our evidence does not cite. Yes, nuclear war, which our evidence doesn't cite. Yeah, like their sort of bunkers argument doesn't matter. The bunkers argument doesn't matter. Like 100 people is enough. If you look at like stability, if you look at like populations, etc., they would suffer natural disasters, harsh climate, etc., would make it through a nuclear winter and would just like lose their food supply, etc. The first counterplan. One permutation due to the counterplan results in appropriation and just functional competition because the counterplan result in the after-dex computation prevents research and increases the preparation. Second, permutation due looks like companies are following the trees and so if policies pass. Fourth, a third, it can't solve no jurisdiction of private entity oversee UN free bus states and about appropriations. So it could be no data competencies for UN free trees, the OST governing bodies, the rescue astronauts, the image by state registration commission, the treaty governing states, and five, impact no for why space foreign resolve conflicts. Hotlines talks historically don't dilute attention. Six, it's bad. They're called evidence on the other components. They threw their hands up at CME, so we could do nothing, which means they're not good at innovation. Can't solve. Seven, no innovations from Israel are actually innovations from Israel are actually happening with no benefit. That's not fun. One, permutation to both a point the company has an exception. B point is not technically committed. Most objectives is for accommodation. Second, permutation to the app and all other private entities should appropriate outer space via developing large virtual event electromagnetic shields that limited intrinsic is good versus appropriation uniqueness fixed with the relevant of the appropriation being calculation and being in some advocates. A point is logic and topic culture. Kind of not a real opportunity to find the business topic culture because someone else didn't know international agreement would say that Israel private entities specifically need to do this. If Israel appropriation died, they just say Israel to stop and have another country's capable to take over. B point is ground and flash appropriation. You can smooth the after days and start making random things you could do in space that aren't really happening now. But one person I think is cool, which also two ships passing in the night because the AF will have hard answers to rigorous competition. Third, they can't solve Racing, they can't solve racing. Any perception of Israel's space power, as far as Israel UAE relations, whatever pick the outer makes Israel look like a capable of pace. They also can't solve Middle East space racing perception of Israel's space power, powers Middle East spacing, whatever pick outer makes Israel look capable and advancing in space. 5 another benefit. They can't quantify how much the impact Israel is that in private entities can solve. Israel's private entities can actually solve the next time plan. The moon time plan. One, permutation do both. Crossify the justification. Second, permutation do the app and all other private entities such as appropriate the moon through lunar licensing real estate agreements. Crossify the justification for limited interest is good. That I can't solve. Crossify the solvency because it's the same perception that really applies, except it would be on a larger scale because moon appropriation is high. Moon appropriation is higher. Lunar mining is not coming from the state of Israel, and no, Israel does not keep your pulls, and that's ESA 22. That is spacecraft check for lunar regolith in a decade. The next countdown. Permutation to both the benefit doesn't solve our branding, or she doesn't solve because other private space appropriation continues. We have a mining link also links to the benefit because there's no evidence that other private companies would be able to appropriate in time. You need landers and people's materials to get there, which means that banning bear sheet means that doesn't solve the Brazil stuff. One, there's no shift in time. The Bolsonaro election is coming up in a couple months, which means the perception link alone won't be able to swing the election completely in favor of Bolsonaro. Second, no evidence that his competitor would be any better. Third, other companies would be foreign shopping would happen in other countries. No guarantee that would happen in Brazil, which means that they can't guarantee any sort of benefit in the economy, which means there's no net benefit.
Okay. Any reasons to drop the team?
No.
Okay. So on the solar counterplan, it was permutation to both, permutation to the app and all other private entities. Limited intrinsicness is good, right?
On the Van Allen counterplan?
Yeah.
Perm do both. Perm do the AF and like the all other entities. It was a logical limited intrinsicness perm. Can't solve. I can explain the solving deficits if you want. No net benefit.
What were the reasons for limited intrinsicness good? You said something about no opportunity cost after that.
Logic. It was logic and topic literature. And then ground and clash.
What was the reason for? Can you explain all those?
Both of them?
Yeah.
Sure. The logic and topic literature argument was that the counterplan is not a real opportunity cost of the plan based on the topic literature because someone else could do it. No international agreement would say Israel's private entities specifically need to just do need to just appropriate outer space by developing artificial Van Allen electromagnetic.
Okay, what's the next one?
It would say, okay, the second argument is ground and clash. The appropriation uniqueness picks with the app. They incentivize cherry picking random things that you could do in the space that aren't really happening now, but like one person might think is cool, which results in 2 ships passing in the night because the app won't have carded answers for rigorous contestation against like some random counterplan that doesn't apply to the app.
The order is going to be the solar counterplan, then the case. I'll kick out of stuff. Oh, it's going to be new as bad, the solar counterplan, then the case.
Okay.
All right. Is everyone good to go?
Yep.
Cool. New SBAD was dropped. New undisclosed apps, citizen clash and testing in favor of strategic newness that result in interesting 1ACs, but a repetition of the same 2 technical choices that heavily skews ground in favor of the affirmative, since the 1AC will just be generics like case and impact turns, which was what happened in this debate, which the affirmative is infinite prep time to prepare for and defeat. There was no 1-hour response to this. The 2-hour does not get 2-hour responses. Our decision to extend this has been plenty of 1 to 2 hour time on this was based on the 1-hour strategic concession. Anything else destroys debate. You are not ending my career based upon whatever minor just biases you have upon whether new SBAD was good or not. not let me, you should not put me in that position. The other counterplans, we're kicking out of all of them. We're going for extending the solar one. We'll concede defense on the Brazil one. The solar counterplan. The counterplan has private entities construct a solar shield around the Earth. It's a mega constellation of satellites equipped with solar panels that absorb solar energy and can be selectively maneuvered to intercept projectiles. It solves climate change and solar mass ejections. 1. Geoengineering. The solar shield limits solar contact with the Earth by selectively dimming the sun. It can be adjusted to prevent catastrophic terrestrial temperature increase, and the net energy produces offsets needed for terrestrial fossil fuels. 2. Deflection. The shield can be moved to protect from small asteroids and coronal mass ejection from the sun that prevents asteroid collisions and solar flares that fry the electrical grid, destroy technology, and collapse civilization. Each one causes extinction, weakening Van Allen belts, and increase in solar activity makes the risk of coronal mass ejections high. The next day could collapse the civilization by creating a planet-sized EMP that knocks out the grid, causes war, disease, starvation, and water shortages by short-circuiting all the infrastructure on Earth. Magnitude outweighs. We've dropped their extinction first framing, which they read in the one I see. You only have an ethical obligation to keep people alive in the future, with coronal mass ejections and tons of solar flares would cause extinction because they've not read impact defense. Group the permutations first. Extend our nuanced bad argument as a reason for why we get all this. At the worst, it justifies massive negative flexibility. Lack of preparation means multiple tune-our outs are key, and you should use reusability in one area theory. And this argument prevents them from arbitrary denying actually ground that is already at a premium. Also, they dropped the debater on US bad because they error quickly heard our 1 and 2 strategy and dropped the argument, essentially dropped the debater. Their first textual competition stuff. Only textual competition is bad. You should only use functional competition. Logic, premise, and words themselves construct policy with no regard to orders of logical, not how real world decision makers think. Ignore syntax, contra, etc. is a slippery slope that breaks down any standard for competition. 2. Word picks. They're competitive under their interpretation, breaks debate because there are thousands of words in the app and dozens of plan required by the resolution, which leads to low clash and debates. 3. Solvency. 3. It avoids debate. Scrabble prevents cheating word picks like counterplans that do the same thing out, but calling something different, which destroys classic app is not the way. 4. Most clearly mirrors the real policymakers don't worry about exact text when initially expressing the idea. They look at implementation first and see if the bill is desirable. 5. It checks even more cheesy process counterplanes. You can craft textually intrinsic but functionally extrinsic perms to beat them. That solves their stuff, and it also responds to the reasons why they think textual competition is good to begin with. The topical intrinsicness stuff first. Reject perms that are functionally or textually intrinsic. 1. Arbitrariness. They justify an infinite number of word scrambles and plan plus perms that beat every dissent and remove the basis for any counterplan that destroys negative ground and functionally sticks us with the scope. Finally, there's no bright line for when to allow. The standard in the 1AR is vague, could be applied to any counterplan as a backdoor justification for letting the app cheat when they fumble a counterplan. They've not explicated what a solvency advocate is. Is that just like one word that says a solar valent belt, one word that says Israel? What does that mean? Or because of our counterplan just said one word that mentioned Israel, that can potentially classify as a solvency advocate, which means that they don't solve any of their offense. 2. Process is good. The counterplan impact trends resolution. It's not arbitrary and unfair, and it's a TUC. So you should hold the line on whiny app theory. Literature shapes granted as a solvency active, true predictable debate worth having in their literature. It's arbitrary. 3. It's always bad in their limited form. Is leads to intrinsic arguments. No bright line for what constitutes functional textual extrinsic, and either one grants you the other because you get add new functions or new text to generate any possible permutation. Those are bad because they functionally get to ask new 1AR add-ons, which research the debate in 1AR only gives us a speech to respond, makes ask last speech advantage even worse than usual. In theory, heavy debates. 4. Process counterplanes are good, especially in the context of new affirmatives where there's nothing for us to restart, and would mean that we would just go to new generic arguments like case, which the affirmative is more prepared to engage on. They say no opportunity cost. Yes, opportunity cost. You have to prove why all the entirety of Israel banning space appropriation is a good or bad thing. That's why you phrase the plan text the way you did. If you didn't want to do that, you should have phrased the plan text as restrict or reduction, which solves off your offense. That's what Harker does, and there's no reason why you shouldn't do that. You made the strategic error in phrasing your plan text as stating all unjust and not making a permutation in the 1AR that defined restrict. Second, they are happening now, even if our evidence does not mention specifically Israel. You still have to defend why all of Israel. You still have to defend why all of Israel. You still have to defend why all of Israel removing it is bad. It's a logical opportunity cost for the app and something to do. 2. This argument is non-unique. Affirmative teams will still choose small appropriation apps that people that one small person thinks in the literature is good with, like effectively viewed it with the Israel app, where there's literally only one company, which proves that the only way for the negative to stay in the game is to read counterplanes like this back at them that resolves all this permutation stuff, that functionally resolves all this permutation stuff. The line by line, if they're solvency deficits, the solvency deficits don't make any sense. All of their arguments around the solvency deficit are in the context of Bereshit 1 and 2, which is about appropriation on the moon. Our argument is that it would just be a mega constellation that would go up all the way at the L1 Lagrange point. No one in their right mind would consider this to be attack on sovereignty. No one in their right mind would consider this to be a missile to arms race because it's obviously not something militarizing. And second, Israel would be doing this out of the goodness of their own hearts to stop coronal mass ejections. Iran would not see this as militarizing. They would just see this as Israel being defensive and trying to protect humanity. There is no way any nefarious action could be looked here. Third, you should look through all of their 1EC evidence, all in the context of Bereshit 1 and like moon types appropriation. So this is irrelevant. They can't quantify the net benefit was answered about the advantage. There is absolutely no chance of a Middle Eastern war. We'll extend our meat evidence first. Appears to prove all Middle Eastern wars, no matter whether all Middle Eastern wars always say localized, no regional conflicts are drawn in. That whole region is potentially in a conflict of war. Things like 2014, Yemen, Syria wars, the Syrian refugee crisis, all proves that war states localized, and there's no incentive for drawn because there's not enough strategic interest there. Yes, there might be oil, but but countries can get that from other places like Latin America or US based suppliers or other countries in the European Union. Second, they're also not enough economic interest, and even if you consider there to be economic interest, that doesn't even if you consider there to be economic interest, all countries also have economic interest other, which can also fill in the gap. They say it doesn't assume their scenario. Yes, it does. 2014 was sort of the start of the space reconnaissance. And second, even if it doesn't assume your scenario, it's ridiculous to assume things like space militarization would somehow outweigh Syria being controlled by ISIS and like 100 million people having a refugee crisis across the entirety of 2016.
Okay, 20 seconds. What were the last arguments made on case? I missed them.
Like starting from where?
What were the last arguments made in the speech?
It's ridiculous to assume that space militarization somehow outweighs like the Syrian refugee crisis, where hundreds of millions of people were displaced and went to other countries around the European Union, which caused a war.
Okay, what's the implication of that?
It proves that your impact either should have triggered or B, it won't happen.
Okay, that's fine. Is everybody good? The order is the counterplan.
Yeah.
And the stuff will be on the counterplan.
Wait, say the order one more time.
Case, then the counterplan. Is everybody good? Cool. Going for the arms racing advantage, dual use technology build up in Israel and the Middle East due to increasing space industry causes arms racing in the Middle East escalates when great powers get drawn in. Yes, it's not ridiculous to assume space militarization outweighs one. Our scenario is not space militarization. Our scenario is not space militarization, but rather dual use technology in space, and also growing commercial sector. And also dual use technology in space leads to a military buildup. Leads to a military buildup on Earth and things like missiles, anti-missile systems, etc., which is warranted in our evidence, which specifically causes escalation that. Sort of refugee crisis, but not on the counterplan. We're going for the intrinsic permutation. The U.S. bad argument first. I'll deal with first. It was not a real argument in the one. It was not a real argument in the 1 and C. It was not on the doc, and was at most 5 seconds, which means you should not end my career on a 5-second U.S. bad. You should not end my career on a 5-second U.S. bad blip. That was not in the that was not in the doc. And also we have sort of embedded class 2 in the U.S. bad block, which I'll get to in the intrinsic perm block, which I'll get to here. We're going for the intrinsic perm. Limited intrinsicness solves all their offense. We can't check on random advocacies like nuisance and net perm would be other counterplan actions. The net benefit is truly a diss at the plan. They have substantive diss at the perm or critique advocacy actions. Go for a diss at the permutation solves all their offense. The act and all other entities taking action to appropriate space through like the Van Allen Belt defense. Means that it solves all their offense because all other companies can do it. Their solvency advocate is about the United States a project by NASA, which is a project by NASA, which is a clear bright line for what a solvency advocate is. Which is a clear line for what a solvency advocate is. A solvency advocate is all a solvency advocate. All a solvency advocate is sort of is the sort of card that advocates solvency for a card that advocates solvency with the counterplan, which is like sort of in the name, which means there are no bright line argument. It's sort of ridiculous. Your card doesn't even mention the word Israel, which means that doesn't. Your card doesn't even mention the word Israel, which means it doesn't matter independently. Word Israel, which means it doesn't matter. The sort of rest of the lemma, and you say. Error heavily negative. You say error heavily negative on nuance bad. No implication of what specific arguments you should error negative on, or what it means to error negative on, which means it doesn't matter. You say only functional. You say reject intrinsic. You say it destroys negative perms. No, does that explain why limited intrinsicness solves? Because you have to read real counterplans. You say the standard is vague. I just explain why it's not. Process counterplan is good. Doesn't it solve? Because you should read process counterplans that are specifically indexed for AF, which leads to better clash, which is our ground and clash argument, which internal link turns your argument because specific process counterplans result in better clash. You say better clash. Also. You also drop that. You should sort of error off on the question because the negative gets accountable because when the negative gets to read counterplans like this, it results in 2 steps passing on the light, which is a sort of afflex argument that the negative reaction gets to choose a significant class, and we should actually get strategic flexibility to answer that, which is a sort of embedded class that answers the new after bad, which answers new after bad argument. You say it's always in bad. You say all intrinsic perms always roll and are always bad. No, they're not. They're not bad against process counterplans that are indexed to the app because the intrinsic perm would never solve, which means you get a substantive dissets to it. You say you get new one-error add-ons. No, they don't. No judge votes for new one-error add-ons, which means it doesn't matter. You say process counterplans are. You say you get new generic arguments. You should cut specific arguments that are indexed to the app. You should have. It's a TOC. You should be able to cut those things, which means it doesn't matter.
Good debate.
Good round.
Hey, could you send the text of the perm that you're going for in the email chain?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, we have a decision.
I'm good.
Okay. With all the judges here, yeah, I guess so. Okay, congratulations to both teams for making it to octas of the Tournament of Champions. The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from Parker. So good job. I'll go first. And let me know how much you want to hear about all of this stuff. I think that the neg is winning the textual competition alone is a bad basis for counterplan competition, which means that the limited intrinsic firm that the 2AR goes for should be rejected. I thought the negative just had a ton of offense about how using textual competition alone is a bad standard that results in a bunch of bad counterplans like word picks and things that just sort of do the same function as the plan, but use different words to do that. And I think the research impacts of allowing those bad counterplans into the debate just outweighed the research impact of occasionally allowing counterplans without clear solvency advocates like this counterplan. I think a world where the neg is allowed to just read counterplans that do functionally the same thing but change the words is far worse for both the aff and the neg than just allowing counterplans that do some tangible thing but in the opposite direction of the aff, even if it's true that there's no obvious solvency advocate for them. There's some other arguments about how policymakers looking at functionally different plans to compare policies that doesn't have a super great response in the 2AR. That I guess is just like some defense to the app's offense about opportunity costs and topic lit, because counterplans competing on text alone would obviously be worse for those things. I kind of agree with this 2NR argument about there not being a bright line for what a solvency advocate is. I don't really think the 2AR is correct in saying that the counterplan that the neg is reading actually advocates that NASA should do the whole Van Allen belt thing. It's sort of just like citing NASA studies, but it just sort of seems to suggest that this is something that actors in space should be looking at, which means that I guess it's at least somewhat legitimate for the negatives to suggest that Israel should do it. And lastly, I think the neg is winning some defense to the research solvency advocate stuff with their arguments suggesting that it is a real opportunity cost because the way the plan is written means that the aff should be forced to defend Israel banning their entire space sector. There's not really like a great answer to the argument that if the aff wanted to avoid debating this kind of plan, the plan text should have said restrict instead of ban, which seems just like sort of like an intuitively true argument. So I totally agree with you that that this standard for counterplan competition does allow counterplans without great solvency advocates, which definitely has some research costs. But I think that the neg is winning some just external offense that I ultimately concluded outweighed. So yeah.
I go next. Agree with all of that. Plus new app's bad. It was a neg. I think very sketch put at the bottom of the DA. But the 1AR should answer it. But yeah, I'll talk about the intrinsic firm. I thought the negs, arbitrariness, intrinsicness, snowball stuff was pretty big. I don't think it's just about having a solvency advocate, which is most of this 2AR is a solvency advocate is advocating solvency. But what it means to be in their solvency advocate, or what it means for the neg to have these words in the plan, or have about Israel. Even if it's clear in this debate, I don't think it's clear in general how the aff's bright line functions. And I don't think it's a predictable standard for intrinsicness. So neg's arbitrariness offense outweighs. Didn't read cards, so didn't look at this NASA stuff, but agree with opportunity cost things. So yeah, new app's bad, arbitrariness answers the intrinsicness stuff. But it's been fun judging you, Kagi, and octas of the TOC. It's an incredible accomplishment. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, congrats on a great career. I've honestly had a great time judging you over the past few years. So you should be really proud of yourself, especially for making it this far at the TOC. I voted pretty much immediately on UF's bad. I know it wasn't on the doc. I know it wasn't on a particular sheet, but it was there. It was flagged as a reason to drop the team. And that's kind of it. It's just like the thing, you just can't drop it, right? And that's kind of what the 1AR did. Unfortunately, in the 2AR, arguments about why even if limited intrinsicness is good, none of those justify why new AFs are good. So I don't feel comfortable voting AF on that. And I think even had I not voted on your side, I probably would have also voted neg because of the solvency advocate stuff does not establish a clear bright line for what is intrinsicness for me. So I think the 2AR / the 1AR would have to be a little more compelling on at what point do we determine when limited intrinsicness is good.
Yeah, great debate, Kagi, and I just want to reiterate that I've debated you, I think, like 6 times this year. Each time it's like the nano nagel time, which is like impact turns both times, just hilarious and insanely fun.
Yeah.
I've always loved debating you, and for we can play Madden after this tournament ends.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you all, and